We started last week on the second half of his years of ministry. In the blue, those are the years that he was actively ministering. But this point right here that we hit last week is a pivot point. Prior to that, he's been traveling all over Asia Minor, Greece, and visiting and planting churches and preaching the gospel. And then everything changes. And at the point where he comes to Jerusalem, we begin to see what's called a journey narrative. You know what a journey narrative is? Well, they're all around us. The journey narrative is where the protagonist is at a place, and he has to get to another place. Or he's in a state, and he has to get to another state. Opposition, uncertainty, disasters, troubles, doubts, fears, and then finally gets to his destination. It's in the movies all around us. It's in literature. The Greeks had it. Homer's Odyssey was Odysseus left Troy, and he had to find his way back to Ithaca. And in the Christian world, back in the 1600s, John Bunyan wrote the famous Pilgrim's Progress. And I really urge you to read that book. In it, you're going to see yourself. It's a fabulous book about a journey from the city of destruction to the city of God, to the celestial city. It's a fascinating story, but it's a journey narrative. A good third of the book of Luke is devoted to the journey of Jesus from Galilee to Jerusalem. Remember, he said, he set his face like a flint to Jerusalem. He's going from Galilee to the cross. It's a journey narrative. And we're beginning here where Paul is arrested, tried. Last week we went through that. Remember the mob? He had to be rescued twice from a mob. He was tried before the Sanhedrin. Well, this is a journey narrative. And it began back when he was in Miletus talking to the elders of Ephesus before he went to Jerusalem. He said, I am bound in the spirit to go to Jerusalem, but I'm going to drop off the money that we've collected, and then I have got to go to Rome. So he's always wanted to go to Rome. He says that many times. Even after Rome, he'd like to go further. And that's the beginning of a journey narrative from Jerusalem to Rome. And there's a little symbolism in that, isn't it? I mean, the gospel came out of Jerusalem. That's where Jesus was crucified and raised from the dead. That's where Pentecost happened. That's where the church was founded. And Paul was called to take the gospel to the vast majority of humanity who were Gentiles. And he's going from Jerusalem to the center of Gentile power and population, which is Rome. So it's a journey narrative. And of course, along the way, things don't happen the way he expected. Instead of, going to Jerusalem, dropping off the money, picking up a ticket to head to Rome to visit the church, he's arrested by a mob. He's saved by the Romans. He's tried before the Sanhedrin. He has to be saved again. He's taken into Caesarea, and he's there cooling his heels for 2 years. We don't know that he did anything during those 2 years. Don't believe there are any prison epistles that are written in those 2 years. He must have sat there and said, wait a minute. Was I supposed to go to Rome or wasn't I? Has God called me to Rome? As a matter of fact, he had such doubts that God gave him encouragement after he had been rescued the second time and taken away to Caesarea under armed guard. And the Lord appeared to him in a dream and says, you are going to go to Rome. Don't worry, you're going to go there to Rome. I have called on you to preach to the Gentiles and to their kings and to the Jews. And of course, he's now preached to Felix, the Sanhedrin, Festus, and to Agrippa. And he's appealed to go to Rome. And so he actually will go to Rome. So finally, things are moving. After this journey has not gone very far, he hasn't gotten anything but trouble. Now he's going to go to Rome. During his fourth defense before Festus, a clever thing happened. I mean, he could have spent all his time just witnessing to governors and to people in the prison for the rest of his life. But something happened to change that. And what happened was the Jews who were accusing him came to Festus, brand new governor, wants to please them, wants to get along, and they move for a change of venue. We'd like to have you bring him to Jerusalem so he may be tried before a Jewish court. Of course, Paul knew what that meant, right? That meant they were going to ambush him and they were going to kill him like they tried to do before. So he was between a rock and a hard place, and he exercised his right as a Roman citizen. He says, I appeal to Caesar. He had no choice. Jack, the voice from heaven, would you read 25, 9 to 12, please?
Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?" Paul answered, "I am now standing before Caesar's court where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself very well know. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar." After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, "You have appealed to Caesar. To Caesar you will go."
Actually, this was a good deal for Festus because he could get out of having to deal with Paul and the Jews. He could simply tell the Jews, "I've got no choice. Roman law says he's got to go to Italy." And the Jews would have had to accept that. And so he was taken off the hook, and he just kicked the can down the road and put the monkey on the emperor's back, which was fine with him. But nonetheless, the providence of God is taking Paul on his journey to Rome. He's passed through half of all the problems and all of the side journeys and all of the suffering, and he is now on his way. Jesus had told Paul through Ananias, "Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel." And this he had pretty much accomplished, but there was one king yet, and that was the Roman Empire, the most powerful man in all the world. Now, the trip to Rome is an adventure, and it's a great story. But it's part of this journey narrative that tells us a lot about the providence of God accomplishing his purposes in ways that we simply cannot fathom. There's an expert in classical literature, Thomas Walker, don't know who he is, but he said this, said, quote, "There is no such detailed record of the working of an ancient ship in the whole of classical literature than Luke." That's pretty good. So we get a real picture into what it takes to sail a boat in those days in Rome. Remember, Rome was a coastal empire, more or less. Okay, it rimmed the entire Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea was kind of like its lake. And everything was done by boat that could be done by boat because it was a lot easier and a lot cheaper than going by land. So we start the narrative. We're going to be in chapters 27 and 28 if you want to follow along, because I can't read every bit of that. And let's start with 27, 1 and 2, Jack.
When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us.
So here, Paul has been handed over to a centurion, the commander of 100, and his name's Julius. I like Julius. He's a very positive, sympathetic character in this whole story. Seems to be just and fair and respectful. And some other prisoners are also with him, probably a fair number who were condemned to death. And they would be taken to Rome and they would be executed in the arena. Wild animals, the gladiator contest. The Romans had this incredible appetite for entertainment that was violent and bloody. Does that sound familiar? Except for their case, they didn't have special effects, so they did it all for real. Now, we know that Luke is with him because it says we. And Aristarchus, one of the church members from Macedonia, probably a rep that had come with him to deliver the money, also chose to go. And how they got on the boat, nobody knows, except possibly they went as Paul's slaves. They would masquerade as Paul's slaves. That way they could stay with him. And, I did a little look at it. What did ancient ships look like? I mean, what kind of maritime science did they know? They were really advanced. I mean, if the Mediterranean was your lake and everything had to be done by sea, you got to be pretty good. Here's some pictures and models of old ships. They could carry 100 or 500 tons of cargo. And my favorite is this one. This is a real boat. It's actually a commissioned ship in the Greek Navy. It's called the Olympias. And it is a replica built as best they could from all the pictures and carvings and records of ancient Greece. It's a trireme, which is a warship. By trireme, what that means is there are 3 levels of rowers. So they got 3 sets of oars. There's 170 rowers on this boat. It's 120 feet long, 20 feet wide, has a draft of 4 feet, and it weighs almost 50 tons. And it's very interesting. They built this in the late 80s and put out a request for anybody who wanted to come and participate. They were going to do sea trials. And so a lot of young people, you know how we are when we're young, they do crazy things. And they say, yeah, we signed up. So they brought all these able-bodied young people on, and they taught them how to row. And they went out, and they actually were able to make 9 knots. And we're told that in ancient times, of course, they would have had all strong slaves probably manning the oars. They would have rammed at about 16 knots. 50 tons, 16 knots. There's a 450-pound ram sticking out of the bow underwater, and that's how you fought in those days. They had 170 oarsmen and about 5 officers. Now, that's going to be important to remember later. There were 19 infantry, hoplites, and there were 4 archers. So the idea was you ran the enemy's ship. If you couldn't back away and ram somebody else, then your soldiers would leap onto the other ship in hand-to-hand combat. The archers would fire arrows that were burning, try and burn the other ship down. It must have been quite a thing. And that's how they fought in those days. But the point is that this is a boat that can carry a crew of 200 people. And Paul, it says, was on a boat that had a complement of 276 people. So it's a big boat. It's the one he finally got on. It's not the first one that he got on. So let's take a look at this just for fun. It's wonderful to see the ups and downs of his trip. The first ship that they caught was a coastal vessel. It says it was from Adramyttium, which is up here in the Aegean Sea along the coast of Asia. And so they're down here in Caesarea. This is the milk run, okay? These are the guys that stop all along the way. And apparently the centurion could not commandeer a boat that was going to go directly to Rome at Caesarea for some reason. And so he says, tell you what we'll do, we'll take this trip up the coast and we'll find another port. Maybe we can get a boat from there. That's kind of why they did that, okay? And so they sailed north to Sidon, as you can see down here from Caesarea to Sidon. And while they were there trying to figure out what to do next, he visited the church there, which is great, you know? Now, at this time, the winds are west-southwest. In the summer, how many of you are sailors, like to sail? Anybody here can sail a boat? Oh boy. Okay. We'll put a look. We'll give you a little bit of information. But anyway, you know, the winds normally in the south, the prevailing winds are, in the summer, they're coming more from the south. And as the fall comes, they move in this direction to the point where when you get to October, November, you can't sail to the west any longer. Now, a sailboat can go upwind, sort of. A modern sailboat can sail within 20, 25 degrees of the wind and go along like that if he tacks. Okay, a sailboat does that. The best place to sail is a beam reach where you're going perpendicular to the wind. Downwind is fine, it's just slow, okay, because you can't go any faster than the wind. And so you can see by seeing where the winds are what they had to deal with. Now it says in verses 4 and 5, if I got this right, it says, we put to sea again after Sidon, and we passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. Okay, rather than take the southerly route, which they might normally have taken, they go back up to the north and they stay in the lee of Cyprus because the landmass will change the direction of the winds, and you might be able to get a fortunate breeze to give you where you want to go. And then they had to get across this open water, and they made it to Myra, but it wasn't easy because they're bucking the winds. They're trying to go upwind with this old square-rigged boat. Now, when they get here to Myra, they're able to find another vessel, a bigger one that could handle 276 people. It was coming from Alexandria, which is down here, headed for Rome, and it was a grain ship. Rome was sustained by grain from Egypt, and Alexandria was the port that it came from. So they were going up north, and then they were going to try to make it to Rome, probably understood that they needed to winter over someplace. Now, Paul, let's see, verse 9 tells us that it was October, Yom Kippur, which is this week, right, Len? Isn't Yom Kippur this week? Right. It's early October, and the prevailing winds were shifting from the west-southwest now to the northwest. You can see that makes their journey much more difficult. Makes a lot of sense. Here they are over at Myra, and they got to get to Rome. How are you going to do that? You can't go directly upwind. Well, they tried along the coast and managed to get some wind, and they made it to the island of Cnidus. But then they said, no, we can't go any further. It looks like we're going to be forced to go south and find a place to winter over in Crete. So they yielded to the wind. Remember, going perpendicular to the wind works just great. And they come south, and then they have to turn the corner. And they said, with very difficulty, we had to go upwind to get to Fair Havens. And so they put in at this small port called Fair Havens. Now, Paul is probably the most experienced sailor aboard. And it is obvious that there's no way they're going to get to Rome this year. They're going to have to winter over. And he warns the captain and the centurion that it is too late for you to go to Rome. We need to stay here. Okay? 27, 9-12.
Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the fast. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest.
Now, they're in Fair Havens, and there were hardly any bars in Fair Havens, so the sailors were not going to stay there. They said, we've got to get to a bigger port where we can sit down for about 2 or 3 months and enjoy ourselves. And so they really had a strong feeling of what we called in aviation, get home-itis. You're always told, do not fly into bad weather because you just have to make it home. And that's what they did. They had to make it to Phoenix because that would be just a better place to winter over. And so they're waiting for the breeze to give them a chance to go. And it's 40 miles they got to go. And they get a sucker breeze from the south. And so they set sail, but it doesn't turn too well because now all of a sudden they get hurricane force winds, a northeaster where the wind shifts from the northeast and is swirling with rain and hurricane winds, and they can't get into port at Phoenix, and it's driving them out to sea. No more open harbors, and their greatest danger, of course, is to be driven onto the rocks and the sandbars of North Africa. So that's where he is. Now, they did 5 things to save the ship. They passed, well, let me back up here. They passed in the lee of this small island, Cauda, and when they had a little bit of relief in the lee of the island, they were able to take the lifeboat and put it up on the deck and lash it down. I've done that before. You can't tow a dinghy behind your boat if you've got heavy seas and heavy winds. So you try to find a time when you can get the dinghy alongside, you pick up the lifeboat and you put it on the ship and tie it down. And that's what they did there. And that's significant for later. They frapped the boat or stiffened it. What you do there in those days is you run cables underneath the ship to tie them, kind of bundle it together, and a cable from the bow to the stern to keep it from breaking apart. Hopefully that'll give you a little more endurance. And then they deployed a sea anchor. And a sea anchor is nothing more than a little parachute that goes underwater that you drag behind you, try to keep you from being pushed. They're very much afraid that they're going to wind up down here, okay? They don't know where they are. They have no idea. Then they start jettisoning some cargo. And it says that on the 3rd day, they start jettisoning the ship's tackle and its equipment. So at this point, they've had 11 days, no sun, no stars to navigate by. Paul speaks, 27, 1 to 26, or 21 to 26.
After the men had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God who I am and whom I serve stood before me and said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island."
So Paul is recognizing they're in big trouble. It looks like they're not going to make it. We're going to lose the ship, but don't be afraid. I've had a dream. And I can imagine, Julius, when Paul gave him the advice back before the storm, back in Fair Havens, he said, "Don't do this. You're going to lose the ship and the cargo." He says, who might listen to this Jew preacher that's come on board my ship? He's a prisoner. He's going to stand for his life. Nah, I don't think I want to listen to him. Well, now things are a little bit different. But still, Paul says, don't be afraid. I've had a dream. An angel of the Lord told me, you will make it to Rome. You will stand before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all those who sail. So keep up your courage, men. I have faith in God. It will happen just as he told me. A steadfast courage, encouragement. You see Paul under stress and wonderful things. But then again, he says, nevertheless, we're going to run aground. And that wasn't good news. I don't know whether they believed him or not, but at least Paul shared to them his confidence and his what God has told him. And then we have this really fascinating event. The sailors, and I think in this case it's the officers, because there's only 5 of them. And they decide, we need to get out of here. Let's take the lifeboat, put the lifeboat in the water, jump in, and we'll go on our own. Leave these guys to their fate. They're going to go onto some rocks and get broken up. They're all going to die. We can make it out of here. So Luke tells us in 27:30-32.
In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it fall away.
Now, you got to make a movie out of this. I mean, this is awesome. It's the winds howling, the rain's coming down, the ship's going like this. If you've ever been in a big storm in a small ship, you get an idea what that's like. And they can't hardly hear one another. And Paul sees these officers over there unlashing the lifeboat. They're going to put it in the water. And he runs over to Julius. And here he is, Humphrey Bogart, And he gets to Julius. He's all wet and his hair is stringy and the wind's blowing and he's yelling in his ear. He says, "If these men leave the ship, you're never going to make it. You're all going to die. You've got to stop them." And the centurion says, "Now I think I'll listen to him." And so he tells his men, "Cut the ropes." And they cut the ropes. And the boat goes crashing over the side and into the water and then just drifts off behind them. And I imagine the sailors were furious. And now they're fighting. Can you imagine the drama? Why Hollywood hasn't done that, I have no idea, but I love the picture of that. So Julius finally understands that Paul's a guy you got to listen to. Well, then Paul encourages everyone. The next verses tell us that. It's just wonderful. In 27:34-35.
"Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head." After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat.
I just want to stop here. And I want to take a look at the character of this man and what it tells us about a Christian who is under extreme duress and stress for prolonged periods of time. Remember, he's been at this for 2 years. Okay, he's been in prison, he's been mobbed, he's been beaten up, he did all kinds of things. And now he's sentenced to go on trial for his life in Rome. And yet God has told him, "You're going to testify for me before Caesar." And so he comes to this point. And God gives us a picture of the character of a Christian. Have you ever gone to an unbelieving an unbelieving funeral as opposed to a Christian funeral? If you got a real believing Christian family, it's radically different, isn't it? So we could see some things about Paul, and I want to just throw it out for just a minute or so. We haven't got a lot of time, but what do you see in Paul's character that would be representative of a believing Christian under duress for an extended period of time?
Faith.
What was that?
Continued faith.
Continued faith, right? No, and you said the same thing. Believe. What else?
Endurance.
Endurance. Okay.
Courage.
Courage. Absolutely. He's fearless.
Leader.
He's a leader. Oh, he is. He cares about him.
No panic.
What was that? No panic. That's right. He's calm. He's calm. He eats the bread in front of the people. I love that.
Thanks to God.
He's giving thanks to God. Well, his testimony is strong, isn't it? He's told them, God has told me that we're going to make it. And they said, really? You had a dream, right? Well, you know, sometimes I think Paul may have asked the question, was that God talking to me, or was that just my French fries? You know, it's hard to tell sometimes, but he was confident. Sound thinking based on peace, right?
He's willing to speak truth to authority.
He could speak truth, yeah, fearlessly. Well, go ahead.
He spoke life instead of death.
Oh, he's an optimist, right?
He's also a great example to the unbelievers that are with him.
Yeah, exactly. He's a great example. Well, I got my list, and basically you've covered it all. First of all, he's calm and unafraid. Why? Why are you, when you're in the storm, calm and unafraid? You know where you're going, right? You know, well, I know where I'm going, and I know who's going with me. Remember the song? Yeah. There's a sense of we have a sense of destiny. My destiny forever is already taken care of. What's the worst that can happen to me? Psalm 116 says, I will trust in the Lord. I put my faith in God, rather. And what can man do unto me? What else can happen? Yeah, he had understood that he was under God's orders. He recognized that God had given him a promise, and he looked forward, even if he died, to eternal life. And that's true for us. You know, as we get, we're all getting old. We hear that a lot. We talk to one another. We're starting to see, you know, those inevitable illnesses and troubles that hit you as you get older starting to become more numerous, and they will continue. In life, when I was 50, when I turned 50, my boss said to me, well, it's not the end of your life, but you can see it from there. And you get to be 75 and it's a little bit closer, right? And those of you who are hitting the 80s, it's a lot closer. And I see life as this hallway. And the end of the hallway is a door. Now, you know, there are people in this world, probably many, most of them, who see that hallway and there's no door. There's no way out. There's no hope. But there's a door there. The trouble is, I have no clue what it looks like behind that door. Do you? Will it be lots of light when I see Jesus? What will it be like to be a spirit, to be a disembodied soul? I have no idea. As a matter of fact, in some ways, I should be afraid of what's behind that door. But I know one thing. I know who's on the other side of that door. And he knows me. And he has promised that I belong to him. Paul said this. He said, the God to whom I belong and whom I serve. Yeah. So that's the reason we can be calm and unafraid. And Paul had faith. I'm sorry, hold on a second, let me get rid of this. There we go. He was calm and unafraid. His faith was that God's providence was guiding things. What's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 say? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and what will he do? Make your path straight, direct your path. I like direct your path because that's in the real Bible, the King James. But nonetheless, yeah, he will direct your path. Psalm 73, one of my favorites, says, you hold me by my right hand and you guide me with your counsel. And afterward, you will take me to glory. Whom have I on earth but you? Excuse me, who have I in heaven but you? And on earth, there's nothing I desire. God is in control. He will direct our path. His providence, though things will go left and right and all over the place, we'll make mistakes. We'll sin. We will be opposed. We will have trouble, natural disasters, but that's okay. He will take us to where our destination is. This journey narrative is not just Paul's. The journey narrative is your life and mine. We each have a journey narrative. Okay, so his compassion, somebody mentioned compassion. He shared God's promises. God has promised me that we're going to lose the ship, but that's okay. He is graciously giving me every person here. He says later on, not a hair of your head will be harmed, but the ship's going down, So he was compassionate. He recognized they were hungry. He says, you guys haven't eaten for 14 days. Listen, it's going to get worse before it gets better. The boat's going to break apart. We're going to end up, going aground somewhere. You're going to need your strength. And so remember, there's 276 people. And so he's got to tell the captain, break out the ship's stores and just pass out all the bread. There's no point in leaving it here, no point in conserving it because it's all going to the bottom. Give these people the nourishment that they need. So he has the crew pull out all the bread and they feed everybody. But the thing I love is when he does that, he tells the captain to feed these people. He takes bread and it says in front of all the people. He eats it and gives thanks to God for it. It kind of looks a little like communion. He broke the bread, he gave thanks, and he ate it. Okay, he was not Pollyannish. We Christians have joy, but we do not pretend everything's just wonderful. Things are often not wonderful. There are lots of trials, lots of troubles, and Paul is not afraid to face them, and neither should we. If the company's going down, you need to shut the company down. If you got the diagnosis for cancer, you need to explore your options. Disasters will happen, but we face them squarely. We are realistic. Back at the beginning, he told them we're gonna lose the ship and the cargo. And in chapter 27, verse 26, he tells them we're gonna go aground on an island somewhere. Y'all know where to find the passage on the virtuous woman? Proverbs 31. And the passage on the virtuous man? Cricket. Psalm 112. Psalm 112. It's a wonderful psalm, and it talks about the man who fears the Lord, the righteous man. And it says in there is an interesting verse. He says, they will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. When we trust, things are going screwy, but we can trust in the Lord. And I bet because we're, most of us fairly old, we've had a lot of experiences. I bet we could get all kinds of stories of people who have had disasters occur to them, but the Lord has taken them through it. He has taught them. He has blessed them. He has changed their course to something better. He has taken their loved one to glory. I remember my dad died. We got the call at 4 a.m. He was miserable. And we got the call, and Carol Ann she kind of cried a little bit. And I said, hon, do you think for 1 second he wants to come back here? No. So we can be realistic and not fear bad news. He is decisive. Don't be afraid to take action. Why can we be unafraid to take action? Well, I think the reason is that if we're in the will of God, we can't fail. If we're out of the will of God, he's already accounted for it. Luther himself said, when you sin boldly. If you're going to make a mistake, go out and make it. Attempt great things for God. Do what you think is his will. See if it is. If it's not, he's already covered that. He's already priced that in, so to speak. And we can be unafraid to take action. And I love the way he goes up to Julius. He says, Julius, if these men leave, you cannot be saved. Go cut the ropes. He acted decisively. I love that. He's an encourager. And more than that, he's an optimist. In all the movies that have shipwreck or ship themes and people are in the lifeboat, there's always that one person in the lifeboat says, "We're all going to die. This boat's leaking. It's going to sink. Oh, there's no one coming to rescue us." You got one of those? And usually it gets very dramatic, and the lead guy on the boat has to go, "Settle down," And Paul's just beautifully, he encourages them. He says, "Be of good courage. God has given me every soul here. You can count on that." We don't always get that promise, but Paul had it. And his only reason to be optimistic was the certainty that God is in control. Nothing has happened to you that he is not in complete control of. And then, of course, leadership. He communicates optimism. He encourages. He breaks bread in front of them, and by example, he sits down, he tells them, "You need to eat." And then he takes some food, and he breaks it, gives thanks to God, and he eats it. What an example. And leadership is really, a great deal of it is about example. How you live your life before your children and before your wife. What you do when nobody's looking affects what you do when they are looking. They talk a lot in leadership circles about servant leaders now. That's proven to be the most effective. The guy that understands that it is incumbent upon the leader to serve the people that he leads. Even Paul never isolated himself from the trials of the people he led. He was down there with them. Even when they were shipwrecked on the beach, he's the one out getting brush for the fire. That would be something that an aristocrat like Paul would have said, "Servants, go get some wood." Paul was unafraid to do labor. I ran into a pastor in India, pastor of this teeny little rural church, very, very poor. His name is Famous, believe it or not. And he came from a Brahmin family. He was a Brahmin. On the caste system, the Brahmins are the highest, and they do not do labor. They do not do that at all. But he was convinced God had called him to lead this church. It's a very small church, but beautiful, wonderful people. And when they ran into financial difficulties, he got a cart and he went out on the street and he sold vegetables. That would be a disgrace to a Brahmin. Didn't matter. He could lead his church because he bled for them. Now, what happens next is they see what looks like a beach. I mean, they know that they're coming up on land. That's why the officers wanted to take the lifeboat. The soundings were getting shallower and shallower. You go to 120 feet, now go to 90 feet. Pretty soon we're going to be on the rocks, and they're looking, what can we do? They threw some anchors out the back to hold the ship and keep it from being driven onto the land. And then they saw it. And lo and behold, good news. It's a beach. I mean, what you don't want to see is the Rock of Gibraltar. What you do want to see is the beach. And so they say, let's cut the lines to the anchors. Let's put the foresail out, and let's drive this boat right up on the beach. Save us all. And so it's a good idea. So they do that. And what happens is they actually hit a sandbar first. They didn't make it all the way to the beach, and the ship is stuck in the sandbar, and the surf is pounding it in the back, and it's breaking apart. You kind of have to put yourself in the shoes of these people. The rowers, well, not the rowers, the passengers were probably below decks, and the ship is breaking apart. They have to come up into the weather, and the wind's howling, and the rain's coming down, and the ship is just coming apart underneath them. And those who could swim jumped in and swam to shore, to the beach, and those who couldn't were given pieces of the ship, and they grabbed on, and they made it. And so they made for shore to this island. And nobody knows for sure if this is it, but this is St. Paul's Bay in Malta. They were on the island of Malta, just south of Sicily. And these are St. Paul's Islands, okay? And it's rainy and it's cold. And in chapter 28, it tells us that Paul was gathering wood for a fire. And as he picked the wood up and was going to throw it in the fire, a viper was apparently energized by the heat and fastened himself onto his hand and bit him. And the sailors and everybody that were there, they thought, "Oh, This man's a murderer, and he has escaped justice, but the gods have rendered justice. But he shakes the thing off into the fire. Nothing happens to him. He should be catatonic by now. And so now they think, oh my goodness, he's not a murderer. He must be a god. So he goes from being a murderer to being a god. Kind of reminds you of Lystra, where they brought out the animals to sacrifice to him, and they thought he was gods, and then they ended up stoning him and leaving him for dead. So this is a satellite view of that place. And you can just imagine they're being driven on. They see this beach here, and so the ship breaks up and they all come here. There's a statue of St. Paul up here, right there. And that's there today. And so there's a wealthy guy who has an estate, probably over here on the main part of the island. And he gives them hospitality. He hosts them for a while, and it turns out that he's got a sick father on the second floor. Well, Paul goes up and heals him. Be healed. And when the people hear about that, what do you think happens? Everybody comes in, and Paul heals them all. Let's take a look at 28, 8-10.
His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed.
So they finally, they were able to stay there for the 3 months required for the winds to change. And Paul had a ministry, healing. The people seemed to be very positive. They gave him provisions, sent them on their way when the southerly winds started in February. And so he starts his way up to Rome. And they get another boat, and they work their way up the coast of, here's Malta down here, okay? And they work their way up Syracuse, Rhegium, and all the way to Puteoli. Puteoli is modern day Naples. Great port of call for the US Navy. Been there a few times. And that's where they disembarked. And apparently, the centurion Julius had to stay there for a little while, about a week or so, and send out messengers and figure out, where does this prisoner go? Where does that prisoner go? How are we going to treat Paul? And that sort of thing. And he did. And so they were able to meet with the church members for about a week. 28, 14-16.
There, we found some brothers who invited us to spend a week with them, and so we came to Rome. The brothers there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the Three Taverns to meet us. At the sight of these men, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself with a soldier to guard him.
Well, a couple of things we know from this is that there is already a church in Rome. And apparently there was one in Puteoli. But they actually came down from Rome to greet him because they got word that Paul, the apostle, is here. And so he'd written a letter to them while he was in Corinth on his third missionary journey, wintering in Corinth, ready to go to Jerusalem at the beginning of all this. And so he had hoped to come visit them. And now, absolutely, that's what he's doing. Now, once he arrives in Rome, he was placed under house arrest. Now, what that meant was he could rent his own house at his expense, but he would be chained by his right wrist to a Roman soldier for the whole time. So it tells us a little bit about what happens there. Chapter 28, we're on 30 and 31, getting to the end of there.
For 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house and welcomed all who came to see him. Boldly and without hindrance, he preached the kingdom of God and taught about the Lord Jesus Christ.
He never thought that would have happened. He's got the chance to sit in a house. He's got a soldier for security, and he's able to preach the gospel to anyone who comes. By the way, notice he's not the bishop of Rome. He's not the pastor of the church in Rome. He can't move anywhere. He's stuck in his house. But people who come, he can witness to them. And God has fulfilled his promise to Ananias. He has chosen to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings, as well as the people of Israel. Now, let's go back to this journey narrative. We should marvel that Paul ever made it to Rome. I mean, apart from the fact that we're looking at history or that we know what God is doing in all this, if you didn't know all that, you'd be amazed that he ever made it. I mean, John Stott quotes, gives us a quote that really, tells us what was going on with poor Paul. I mean, let's face it, he had been assured in a dream that he would go to Rome back in the beginning, but dreams are dreams, and I can imagine he had his doubts and things just didn't seem to be lining up. Well, here's what John Stott says.
Yet circumstance after circumstance seemed calculated to make this impossible. Paul had expressed his intention to proceed straight from Jerusalem to Rome. Instead, he was arrested in Jerusalem, subjected to endless trials, imprisoned in Caesarea, threatened with assassination by the Jews, and then nearly drowned in the Mediterranean, killed by the soldiers, and poisoned by a snake. Each incident seemed to be designed to prevent him from reaching his God-planned, God-promised destination. Since Luke concentrates on the storm, we need to remember that the sea, reminiscent of the primeval chaos, was a regular Old Testament symbol of evil powers in opposition to God.
I really think there must have been some degree of spiritual warfare behind this. I mean, who incentivized the mob in the temple to try to kill him? Who was behind that storm? How many of us have been in a storm like a hurricane that lasted for 2 weeks? I mean, I remember Ian went right smack dab over Shell Point where my mom was, and she was only out of commission for 3-4 days. So there's a tremendous amount of opposition, and it's amazing that this happened. Paul didn't know how it would turn out any more than you or I do. He expected to catch a boat to Rome, be ready to go, visit the church, go on to Spain. But instead, God put him through 5 years of inactivity and suffering, opposition. And then when he arrived at Rome, it wasn't as the apostle who's going to preach and lead the church or plant new churches. He came as a prisoner of Caesar on trial for his life. But in the providence of God. And what is providence? Providence is God's sovereignty in control of all the ups and downs and ins and outs of our journey. Not one of us, I would dare say, ever wound up where we expected to wind up when we were teenagers or young people in college. How did I get to Louisville, Kentucky? What do they do in Louisville? I didn't even know that you had bourbon here. None of that. And I probably couldn't even connect the Derby with Louisville, Kentucky, but that's where I ended up. And I'm grateful that I did. So there were 3 things accomplished. Take a look at them quickly in the providence of God that Paul probably did not expect. First of all, his witness was expanded. He would never have gotten an audience with the emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the ancient world, if he hadn't been a prisoner who was obligated to go on trial before Caesar. So by coming as a prisoner, that's how God got him in front of Caesar. In fact, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 22, which he writes while he's in prison, he says, "Greetings from Caesar's household." There are church members that are part of the imperial family. He spent a whole lot more time preaching than he ever thought he would. He was just going to stop, visit the church, share a few things with them, and then head on to Spain. But instead, he got to preach for 2 whole years. And then Luke says, whole years. It's a long time. Secondly, his witness was enriched. Now, he's in prison, and in this prison, he writes the 4 prison epistles: Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. And they're different. They breathe a joy and peace and contentment that the others don't. Remember Galatians? How soon you have turned from the gospel that I gave you and you've turned to other gods. And he was after them. And then, of course, 1 Corinthians, we went through that whole drama before, kick the man out. And then later on, okay, if he's repented, you can bring him back in. He was always dealing with problems in the church. But in these 3, his eyes are focused upward. And he gives us a view of Jesus, his supreme authority and his deity. In Ephesians 1, he says, in him, in Christ, we have redemption. In him we were chosen. In Philippians, we have that wonderful passage in 2, who Jesus, who being in very nature God, made himself nothing, so that the name of Jesus every knee should bow and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Right? Wow. He's got a vision of Jesus that he gives us that's enormous. Colossians 1, the Son is the image of the invisible God. In him all things were created, and in him all things are sustained. We see a vision of Jesus that's getting closer to what the Apostle John saw in chapter 1 of Revelation, where this vision of this heavenly being of great power and authority. And then Paul John in that situation falls down dead, or practically he's just unconscious. And then this hand reaches down and touches him. He says, John, it's me. And that's the Jesus he walked with. That's the one that you and I can sit at a coffee table with in glory and speak man to man. What a powerful image that is. He says, it's okay, John, I got the keys to death and hell. I can set you free. No one else can. So his witness was enriched, and then it was authenticated. Hello? There we go. Witness was authenticated. You know, when Ananias told Paul that God had called him to the Gentiles, he will be a witness and proclaim my name before the Gentiles and their kings, as well as the Jews. What did he say after that? I will show him how much he will suffer for my name. Suffering brings authenticity. If you watch the memorial service for Charlie Kirk, Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale, spoke. And he tells about how Charlie had come to him and asked him questions, and he gave him questions that Charlie couldn't answer. Charlie says, well, how do I get answers to that? What did Arnn say? Anybody remember that? Read the classics, read the Bible, yeah. He said something specific. He said, you must first suffer. He says, you must suffer. And that's true. We don't know the power and the goodness of God and his love for us like we know it when we suffer. And I think a lot of the reasons that as we get older and older, sickness comes our way, troubles come our way, we learn more and more how important it is that we have a destination where those things are not there, where God will take us to himself. It makes us lose our appetite for this world and gain an appetite for the next one. Now, this is the end of Luke's account. Acts is done. But the pastoral epistles have yet to be written. They were written after Paul's release. And they give us the idea that at his first defense before Caesar, apparently he was acquitted and he was released. And he resumed his travels and church planting. Some people say he went as far as Spain. Some people say he went to Britain. Doubtful. But what happened after about 2 years, he was rearrested and he was tried again and condemned, and then he was executed. And his last letter that was written before he died was 2 Timothy. It's one of the most beautiful letters. In chapter 4, he tells us that at his first defense, everybody except Luke deserted him. He says, only Luke is with me. Some of his team deserted Christ. Demas, for example. He loved this world and he left. Others went off to serve churches. Titus to Cyprus, and Timothy goes somewhere else, and Crescens goes to another place, and they're all serving other churches. The apostolic age is now over. The torch has been passed, for better or worse, to other people. And I would say a lot of it was for worse. Look at history, the medieval church, the Reformation, the wars of religion, the Enlightenment, our postmodern secularization, the crazy things that are happening today. I mean, we see today Israel, for example, whom we believe are still God's chosen people. And every single nation in the world seems to be pointing a gun at them. And we're thinking, they can't possibly survive. They can't make this. What in the providence of God will happen? In his providence, his plan for the universe will ultimately be accomplished. And so Paul finishes his letter to Timothy to tell him the ends at hand, 2 Timothy 4:6.
For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure.
I am being poured out like a drink offering on the altar. It's over. The end is at hand. His race is over. Probably the sentence of death has been passed, and he's waiting in the Mamertine prison for the executioner to come and take his life. He was beheaded, they tell us. You know, in spite of all the opposition, all the suffering, all the confusion, the wrong turns, the baffling developments in his life, in the providence of God, Paul came to the end of his race. He was successful. He fulfilled God's calling and his purpose for life in the providence of God. He never would have charted it in advance any more than you and I would have charted our life in advance. He had complete faith in the providence of God. In the movie business, they say when you finish a movie, it's in the can. You ever heard that phrase? Well, that refers to those metal cans that they used to keep the films in. It's all digital now. Well, Paul's life was in a can. It's not his to do anymore. It's up to someone else to evaluate it. See how it does at the box office. It was up to his Lord to assess it. And he writes those wonderful, famous words. I have fought the good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but to all who have longed for his appearing. I want you to notice a couple things about that phrase. Paul said, I have fought the good fight. He didn't say I won it. He didn't say I won every round. And that's comforting to me because I've lost some rounds. But you continue to fight the good faith. I have fought the good faith. He's finished the race. It doesn't say he won the race. How many of you know anybody who's done the Boston Marathon? What's their great desire? To finish it. We don't expect to win it. That's up to the Kenyans, right? But, he finished the race. He was still running when he got there. And then it says he kept the faith. That's not to say he didn't have doubts or that he didn't sin. I mean, we saw him when he was before the Sanhedrin curse the high priest, and he had to apologize. We saw him with Corinth getting things all out of whack because he was so insensitive and so harsh in his judgments on the church. He had to patch up a lot of relationships. Now our lives will soon be in the can. In fact, much of it's already in the can. We are raising children in the can. For a lot of us, our careers, well, they're pretty much in the can. Our ministry, well, maybe not yet. But soon, it will all be in the can. And the Lord will award the crown of righteousness to those who fought, finished, and kept. Who are those people? It says they are those who love his appearing. Do you love his appearing? The older I get, every day I pray, Lord, may Jesus come today. I knew Dr. Henry Morris. I was on his board for years and at the Institute for Creation Research. Brilliant man. Very, very influential. Very humble and quiet. And in his office, he had a cheap little plastic frame and something that had been printed out for him on paper. And all it said was, maybe today. Maybe today. There's nothing I want to do before that day comes. Those who love his appearing. If you love his appearing, then just like Paul, fight the good fight, finish the race, and keep the faith.